Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's Dr. Jones again. And just like with the weeks before, we're going to be picking up our conversation about atoms to ecosystems. But this time, we're going to move from our discussion of the actual atoms and molecules to the reactions. Now, as always, we have to go over the standards that we're going to be covering. And just like before, we have our middle school standards as well as our high school standards. And they tie together. Here's what I mean. When we look at our middle school standards, what we're looking at is the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration, and talking about the role that they play in moving matter and energy throughout ecosystems and through organisms. When we look at high school, however, we get more detail, more in depth into the actual process. So for high school, we're looking at how photosynthesis transforms light energy into chemical energy, and how cellular respiration will reprocess, reorganize molecules in such a way that you're able to break them down and create energy from this new compound that we're going to form called ATP. Okay? So first, let's start with photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis? Well, if you break it down, first of all, photo means light. When we look at synthesis, here's what we're talking about. We're looking at either recombining or the combination of parts of elements to form a whole. So in photosynthesis, what we're doing is using light energy to make a molecule from individual atoms. All right? Or we're using light energy to take atoms, rearrange them to make new compounds. So in this case, we're using, like I said, light energy to give us carbohydrates, which are sugars. So that's really what photosynthesis is. All right? Now, when we look at carbohydrates, we have to figure out, okay, well, what's in a carbohydrate? Well, think of it like this. I really enjoy carne asada burritos, all right? And if you look at a carne asada, you already know. So, you got the yellow rice, you got the white rice, you have the beans, you have the steak cut up, you have cilantro, you have all of these things that come together to give you this perfect dish. Well, when you look at carbohydrates, it's similar in that even if you're talking about glucose, which is a simple sugar, or sucrose, which is a little bit more complex, or even starch, which is a very complex sugar, you're dealing with the same three elements. Those are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So again, when we're looking at carbohydrates, we have our carbon, we have our hydrogen, and we have our oxygen. And what you find is that everything, regardless of whether it's a sucrose molecule or whether it's starch, it starts with glucose. So this is one reason why when we're talking about the equation that gives us, or the equation of photosynthesis, we're looking at how glucose is formed. Okay? Now, where do we get the atoms that we need from glucose? Because here's the thing. If you recall, there's a law, conservation of mass. Here's what that law states. Matter cannot be created nor destroyed. You can just transfer it from one form to another. Okay? Grandpa used to say, you gotta have money to make money. Same kind of thing. You're not going to make atoms out of thin air, and you're not going to take atoms and just destroy them where they no longer exist. So when we look at this process of photosynthesis, the process of making glucose, we have to get those carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms from somewhere. Where do we get them from? Well, if you're looking at this, we get our carbon and some of our oxygen from carbon dioxide. We get our hydrogen and even more oxygen from water. So what we're saying is we get the carbon, the hydrogen, and the oxygen we need to make sugar molecules from carbon dioxide and water. Now, when I say we, I'm not talking about every organism, only those that can carry on the process of photosynthesis. So, it's like a balancing act. Okay? Here's what I mean. Notice, glucose has 6 carbons. So, if you look at carbon dioxide, which only has 1 carbon, how many do you need? 6. Glucose has 12 hydrogens. If you look at water that has 2 hydrogens, how many do you need? 6. That's the balancing act here. You got it? It's just like math. 2 plus 4 equals 6. On both sides of that equal sign, you have the same quantity, although it's arranged in different numbers. Okay? Now, let's talk about the equation versus the actual process. Here's what I mean. So, for a lot of you, you remember this equation. And I'm talking about all the way down like, elementary school. Photosynthesis, carbon dioxide plus water plus light gives you glucose and oxygen. Yeah, that's great. But I'm going to tell you right now, for those of you who are in an accelerated class, and especially those of you who are taking bio, you see this. And you're like, wait a minute. How do these two relate? Well, here's how. This is the equation for photosynthesis. But that is the actual photosynthetic process. There's a difference. Okay? Remember, carne asada, right? So that's the final product. But to make this, first of all, you got to have like 3 hours of active time. That means like you're actively cooking. Which means if it takes 5 total, you have 2 hours of just prep. Yes. Then let's talk about the ingredients. Well, this is what you need just to get the meat right. This is what you need just to get the beans right. These are the ingredients you need just to get the rice right. And we're not even talking about the cilantro, the tomatoes, the tortilla, the guac, the sour cream. I mean, you follow what I'm saying? So sometimes we teach you the equation to whet your appetite. But we got to teach you the process for you to make the meal. Okay? So, in looking at photosynthesis, as I said, here's our equation, which everybody knows. But I'm going to tell you, if you're in high school, you need to learn the process. So, let's talk a little bit about terminology. Because here's where a lot of people get thrown off with photosynthesis. We throw out a lot of terms that actually mean the same thing, you just don't know it. For example, we have this thing called light-dependent reactions. And then we have this other thing called light-independent reactions. Okay? Think of light-dependent reactions as the photosynthetic reactions that need light. Light-dependent. Think of the ones that are independent as the photosynthetic reactions that can be done in the dark. So you have a light reaction and a dark reaction. Now, some of you guys know these terms, but others are like, wait a minute, somebody told me about a photosystem. Let me show you where that rolls into play. So when you look at your light reaction, it's actually broken up into 2 smaller reactions, photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. And to make matters even more complicated, photosystem 2 occurs before photosystem 1. Think about it like the one that they figured out first and then the one that they figured out after. It's kind of like the Star Wars movies, right? So when I was a kid, I saw Star Wars, right? And technically, it starts at episode 4, but you don't know that, especially in the 70s. Then they went back when you came into the 90s and started with like, oh, now we're at episode 1. And we're like, whoa, wait a minute. You mean the first one was the 4th one? Yeah. Same kind of deal. All right? With your dark reaction, the other name for the dark reaction is the Kelvin cycle. Now, I'm not going to swear that the guy who's figured this out was named Kelvin, but, Here's what I want you to remember or keep in mind. The light reaction uses light energy or electromagnetic waves. We're talking about, either sunlight, light from, lamps, things of that nature. And it uses that to form or create our chemical energy. So we're using photons to start this reaction. Okay? On this side, we're using chemical energy in the form of ATP to start that reaction. So with the light dependent, you need light. With the dark reaction or independent, you just need ATPs. Okay? Cool. So when looking at this in its totality, the entire thing, We have two sides of the house. We have the light dependent side and we have the light independent side. With the light dependent side, you see you got photosystem 2, photosystem 1. And what we're talking about is this side is where we convert water into oxygen. Then this side of the house, which is the Kelvin cycle, is where we convert carbon dioxide into our sugar. So if you're looking at this, you'll notice, okay, I got it. There's two processes. That's how we get the equation. Part of the equation deals with this side of the house. The other part of the equation deals with this side of the house. Okay? So, now that we have sugars, when I come back to you next week, we're going to really be talking about what we do with those sugars. Because again, like I said, going back, photosynthesis goes from carbon dioxide here to glucose. But now that you have glucose, what are you going to do with it? And that's where our discussion will pick up. I hope you guys have a great week. And when we come back, we will discuss where we go from here. Have a great day.